Okay, next item on the agenda, the Broad Street Parkway. Mr. Vancourt?
Good afternoon. We have an update on the budget that I'd like to pass around. We've been
Mr. Vancourt, do you have enough copies for Alderman Dean and others that?
yes, I do have a few extras. So
Yep.
I'll pass the others.
Mr. Went, do you want one?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did everyone get one? Did I come short here?
Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I should probably start with the commissioners.
That's all right. That's all right. I was sure I'd see one. No worries.
All right.
So starting with the Parkway North contract, at this point, the contractor, R.S. Audley, is in winter shutdown. They'll be starting up as soon as they're sure in the spring that the snow has passed. They'll be starting up and doing the work on Broad Street. The one other point I want to make is we are moving forward with working a change order with them to replace the ends of those guardrails on Baldwin Street. It's taken a little longer for them to get the information they need from the manufacturer of those units that we're going to use to replace those, but that's moving ahead, and certainly in the next couple of weeks I expect we'll have that change order working through the process. That's to replace the end units on the guardrails that we've talked about before in Baldwin.
I don't mean to defend them, just for the folks who are gonna be watching the meeting, if you can explain why the change was
Sure.
asked for.
Sure.
That'd be great, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. So, we were moving ahead, and the installation of the guardrail was proceeding. At the very end of the guardrail, there's a unit that's intended to lessen the impact on a vehicle that strikes it, that goes off the road and strikes the end of the guardrail. And so the unit that had been specified by the design engineers is one that was approved by New Hampshire Department of Transportation. There's been some recent lawsuit that was settled by the manufacturer of that particular unit, and at this point, that unit is not no longer approved by the DOT, pending whether that manufacturer goes out and gets additional testing done to demonstrate that the unit's acceptable. And so when that happened, what the DOT said is that their policy is they're not going to go out and replace any that are in place right now, but they're not going to install any new ones. And as it happened, our contractor had just installed, within a couple of weeks of that, had just installed 2 on Baldwin Street and 2 down on the Parkway. And so in looking at that, there was another unit that the contractor brought to our attention. It's been approved in other states that they suggested could be used. New Hampshire DOT has said that that's an acceptable unit to be used in place of the Trinity unit that the issue is with. And so we're proceeding. I expect the cost to be on the order of $2,000 a piece. I mean, it might be a little more than that. And we're going to proceed with the Baldwin Street ones. For the time being, we've got 2 down on the Parkway itself. We're going to leave those in place now because we don't have traffic down on the Parkway. We want to wait and see if the manufacturer of those units does in fact complete the testing that would make DOT say they're acceptable. Sure. So on the River Bridge, the Fairmont Street Bridge contract, as far as the River Bridge goes, drilling of those shafts in the river, the foundation for the River Bridge is continuing. They are making progress. They've completed the work on the southerly abutment and the northerly abutment, the north side of the river. 4 out of the 5 shafts that need to be in place before they can build that abutment are complete. They were tested earlier this week. We're waiting for results on the acceptance of that. They're working on the 5th one, and they're working on the piers in the river as well. So they are continuing to drill. It is continuing to go slower than we had hoped. Variety of reasons for that: mechanical problems, issues, I think, with efforts they were making. It turned out they weren't getting the progress they wanted. They brought different equipment in, and at the same time, the contractors feeling that they've encountered some rock that's different than what they had anticipated, the character of the rock. That's something that our geotechnical consultant is looking at that to see if that's valid, that they've encountered a different site condition, but at this point we don't think so.
that be a significant, I'm sorry,
That's okay, Commissioner
a
Patton.
significant cost increase, or?
At this point, we don't expect a cost increase. We've already, the contractor's schedule continues to creep later and later. We're looking at, for some time now, they've anticipated that they'd be complete the end of July, and the completion date is May 1st, and so there's some 3 months that they're late, and I'd say it's getting later than that. We're working with them to really understand what they can do and see what they can do. One positive note is the work at that salt abutment in the mill yard, if you go in and look at it, once they completed the shafts there, the contractor's moving very, very fast. They've had a few concrete pours, and that's taking shape. So to some extent, we hope they're able to recover some of that schedule. But no, at this point, we don't anticipate there'd be additional costs.
Thank you.
On the Fairmont Street Bridge, the existing bridge has been removed. Quite a lot of excavation has taken place over there in preparation of constructing the new bridge, and quite a few people were, I think, inconvenienced for about a week as the contractor was driving sheetings on the northerly abutment side, on the side towards Amherst Street. Happy to say that the sheeting is complete now. It was completed on Wednesday this week, so at least that nuisance is over for the neighborhood. And so they're going to continue working on that river bridge, on the Fairmont Street Bridge through the winter, and they'll be continuing to work on the drilling and the foundation of the river bridge through the winter. Parkway South, the contractor is now putting together shop drawings, schedules, and all of the submittals that we need to review before construction really starts in earnest. One thing that has been encountered, we realized on a different contract, the contract that is to replace the fire pump in the heart of the mill yard, as the 12-inch water main for that was being installed. We encountered some steam tunnels that weren't anticipated. We understood from record plans that were available, they were in a different location. So,
They're active?
No.
Okay.
no, they're not active.
Okay.
They're a leftover from when the mill yard converted from water power to steam power.
Hmm.
So each of the buildings had a network of steam.
Doesn't seem with, you just couldn't pull them?
Well, the issue is it's a tunnel and there's a pipe inside. The pipe was encased in asbestos insulation, and then over time, of all things, moisture and everything else with the steam and everything, the insulation is completely friable.
Yeah.
And so it's
So,
so we've got a contractor working on putting a cost proposal together to go in and take care of the asbestos over the winter. The good news that they're starting just before winter is this is going to hopefully let the asbestos contractor get ahead of the work. We do have a contingency item in the contract for $360,000 for asbestos that would relate to this kind of work. And at this point, we're hoping that what we know so far will be about $120,000. That's not to say that they won't find more asbestos, and it's also not to say that they won't uncover buried asbestos. So we may well end up needing that entire $360,000. But it looks like what we've encountered now can be dealt with within the budget. And so that work will be going on during the winter, as well as hopefully the contractor will be able to do some work on a large drain line at the river. Other contracts, the chimney, they're working inside the chimney now on the structural reinforcing of the chimney itself. They've shut down the outside work. Fire pump relocation, the 12-inch water main that's needed for that's complete. They're going to start the work on installing the pump itself. Is going to be in an underground chamber. They're going to start work on that the last week in December. They've been delayed on delivery of the pump, and so our concern about the delay on the pump is that it backs up into the work of the south contractor. The way we had split up the work was the fire pump relocation, this contract would put in the water main, put in the pump, and they'd leave. The contractor who's doing the roadway in the south contract would come in. They would basically put in some more water pipe to isolate the existing fire pump that's there. Then they could demolish the fire pump building and take out the pump. Our concern with this delay is that that holds up the south contractor. So right now, we're negotiating with the, with this contractor who's running late. What we'd like them to do is to basically pick up the responsibility for that work in the later contract, and to do that for the same contract cost. The second contractor's agreeable to that, and so we think we'll be coming forward with a pair of change orders related to this. One will increase the cost for the first contractor, they'll finish all the work. The other one will decrease the other contract by the same amount. So the net of the two contract change orders should be a wash.
Commissioner Evans?
Do we have a sense as to how late they're running?
3 or 4 weeks.
Okay. I thought you were gonna say 3 or 4 months.
Oh,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
no, hopefully not.
Okay.
Yeah, where's the wood? We need a little pole in here.
All right, good.
The work at Storehouse number 2, that work is substantially complete, just a couple of things to finish off, and so that's complete and ahead of budget. And the waste house, obviously the demolition of the waste house is complete. And so, looking at the budget projection that I passed out, and passed it out today, we've been fine-tuning, going through and updating a number of things. We have worked on a number of aspects of the project that are coming near completion. We have a better idea of where we're gonna be, particularly with money that we held in contingency. And so you can see the last projection that we had, we were thinking to completion, we were at $57.8 million, and now we're at 59.0. And that, as I mentioned last month, we expected it to go up with the execution of the contract for the south, because we knew that was $1.8 million over our expectations. But we also benefited from significant savings on Storehouse number 2 and the demolition of the waste house. And so a number of other changes as we fine-tune the numbers, but the net result, you can see we're at 59.0. And this is what we think is a reasonable projection. It's not to say we aren't going to encounter additional bad news along the way. Things that we're watching right away throughout the project. We've talked about the right-of-way costs. You can actually see the line item for right-of-way has gone up from 7.5 to 8.3 in this update. That reflects some additional costs that New Hampshire DOT has given us an update on some of the costs, as well as settlement on property where there was dispute about the actual acquisition cost. So looking forward, there are still, I think it's 5 parcels that are challenging, that are in the process of challenging the price that was used to acquire the property. New Hampshire DOT has suggested to us that for the time being, in reserve, they're holding back federal funds in the amount of about $740,000 should those appeals go the way, I guess, reasonable worst case could go. At the same time, we're also looking at surplus property. We've talked about, our budget includes an assumption that we're going to benefit $2 million from the proceeds of selling surplus property. And so this $59 million that you see for completion assumes that we get $2 million back from the sale. At this point, the city had an auction last week and auctioned some property. In terms of the part of that auction that goes back to the Broad Street Parkway is about $300,000. Prior to that, the city sold some property on Broad Street that was taken, about $200,000. So right now, where we stand on that assumption of $2 million, we've already got $500,000 back. But we need to continue to watch that. Now that on our side, on the city side, there's been efforts to look at to accelerate selling of the property, but at the same time, New Hampshire DOT and Federal Highway 2 or 3 months ago, I think, came to us, and they are looking at a different way of proceeding with the property. It's different than what we've talked about before since the start of the city management of the project. What's been said is surplus property The city needs to establish a reasonable price, the city sells the property, and then takes the proceeds of that and gets it back into the project, gets it back to the federal folks to plug in and serve as a pool of money to reimburse expenses. And so what we're up against is a timeline where we have to sell the property and we have to get it back in the project soon enough so there's still construction to be done to provide reimbursement. So now Federal Highway and
Mr. Vancourt, Commissioner Pappas has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Oh,
It's
well,
just,
we just-
I'm thinking out loud. But I'm just, so we're not able to hold the, I'm wondering if the property's gonna be worth more once the Broad Street Parkway is completed. And if it might be worth our while to hang on to it, can we do that or can we not do that?
Well, if you had asked me that a year ago, I would have said no, that the rules are pretty strict about this.
Okay,
And so what we've learned, we're not sure whether what we've learned in the last couple of months is really good news or bad news or somewhere in the middle. But what they're saying now is that the expectation now in their policy that Federal Highway is using now is that for the surplus or excess property, what the city would do is go back and reimburse Federal Highway for all the expenses in acquiring the property in the first place. And then basically the city owns it outright. And so from that perspective, if there was a parcel that the city wanted to hold on to, and the city paid all the expenses that were originally used to acquire the property, then it would be the city's outright. If the city wanted to wait a year, 2 years, 3 years, they could then wait. The city would own it, and at that point, Federal Highway's claim to anything to do with the property would be extinguished.
do you, in your opinion, do you think that might be feasible?
Well, I think it's feasible, as I say, whether that's certainly the good news part of it. So the bad news part of this, when we look at it, is the costs of acquisition back in 2000, 2001, in some cases, are higher than the value now. The cost of acquisition includes the cost of appraisals. It includes any legal costs associated with it. It includes relocations, reestablishments, and in the case of some properties, demolition. And
Also the purchase price, no?
and the purchase
Yeah.
price. And so it could be significantly more than what we could expect to get from a sale. And so what we're looking at and what DOT is looking at is, it comes back to this money that would be reimbursed to Federal Highway for this excess property would go back into the project funding. And provided there's still enough construction left, it would get reimbursed to the city. So if there's lots of construction left, we would give them more money than we might like to, but it will come back in the form of more reimbursement. It's almost as if you're increasing the federal funds for the project. So what we really are looking at closely is what the real ramifications are. How much reimbursable work is really ahead of us compared to what it was DOT spent back in 1999, 2000, 2001. So the DOT has been compiling those numbers for us, and they're going back with Federal Highway. Spoke with our liaison person up there this afternoon. He still doesn't have final confirmation that Federal Highway agrees with DOT on what those numbers are. And so this is really just a update on where we are with something. We don't quite know the conclusions yet.
Mr. Bergeron?
The properties we're talking about, are we talking about a combination of homes and land, or is it mostly land at this point?
It's a combination.
So it's a combination. Do you have a list of what properties that are involved in that $2 million somewhere?
Yeah, generally, we do have a list. Generally, in the back of the mill yard, there's a couple of parcels. The parcel that the police department currently uses for their shooting range.
Mm-hmm.
The parcel that there's a parking lot now
I know the
on,
one.
okay, those are both on the list.
Stevens
Stevens Ave, that neighborhood over there, there's a number of parcels off of Ledge Street there that were acquired and demolished.
Mm-hmm.
There's a property on Hillcrest that includes a house, Hillcrest off of Fairmont. The city just auctioned a couple of them, and we'll have to see what that means, that we were kind of following the old rules and had the auction complete. There's the NIMCO National Industrial Manufacturing Company in the heart of the mill yard. The city owns most of that land that was taken for the project. That would also fall into that category.
That one's the most unusual of all of them. That one's the one that that's less clear about what it can do because it's such an unusual circumstance, and we've got some work to do there to figure it all out. Because it was a strange thing that the city bought the building, bought the majority of the land, except for a small corner under the building that the property owner maintained ownership of. And then it's, because we thought, I guess at the time, when was NIMCO purchased?
That was,
99?
I think it was one of the last ones, 2002, DOT,
So they, for whatever reason, they bought it that way. And then when we decided we weren't gonna use it, we said to the property owner, it's yours, you can keep it, and. And so we're not sure how the rules are gonna apply to that and what we need to do. That's probably one of the biggest unknowns that we
Right.
have.
So have we fully exhausted the federal money that we've spent on this, the
Oh, no.
507, so we haven't spent all of the federal money yet
No.
in the bond, are we fully gonna, so could we potentially have less money than this 30,000,000?
We hope not, we're trying.
507,000 coming, I guess is where I'm going with, or we don't know that based on,
well, as far as the $30.5 million goes, DOT manages the federal funds, and along the way, they've programmed as contracts start up, or as the design effort started up, they programmed so much money for the design. They've programmed so much money for the right-of-way, and each of the big contracts, they've programmed so much for. So if we just look at the $30.5 million, when we advertised for construction, this last contract, the Parkway South contract, when we advertised that, there was $2 million of federal funds, federal dollars, that DOT programmed for that. That coupled with an amount that the DOT was holding in reserve for remaining right-of-way, something on the order of $800,000, that was the remaining federal funds that weren't yet programmed and in place for reimbursement. And so, so now, that's in the process, the contract's been executed, that's in the process, and we have this additional, as I say, we're working with DOT because what we're really trying to understand is how much, so there's that $2 million, and of all of the eligible construction that's still remaining, how much freeboard do we have above that to be adding these new right-of-way reimbursements?
right.
And so that's, clearly there's plenty of construction ahead for that $2 million, but as we start to look at paying back or reimbursing those right-of-way costs, we really want to understand that there's work ahead to pay the city back.
It's our intention, and always has been, to use all the money that was dedicated to this project, all the federal money.
Right, well, that's what I was asking about the
Yes,
property,
right.
the way that's gonna work, so if we could potentially gain money by the sale of those properties, or nobody knows yet.
Well, I mean, as Mr. Vancore said, we're carrying $2 million in anticipation of what we thought we'd get back from long before Mr. Vancore started on the project. That was the estimate that was done. The market certainly has changed, the properties have changed. We've gotten $500,000 to date, we're still working towards that $2 million, but it could change, it depends. I think we were pleased with what sold so far, but selling a house on Amher Street and a house on Prescott Street is different than selling a piece of land on Stevens Ave. as
Yeah,
you
well, that's
know
why I was
better than
asking
a lot of
about
us.
the breakdown. Is that something we'd have ready?
It's actually right on the Broad
Is it
Street
on there?
Parkway website, all of the map identifies all the parcels and what we paid for them.
Mhm.
So if, for
But
example,
there's lists that would have the properties that we currently talking about.
Right,
Is some of
it's on
Is it
there.
updated,
Yeah,
the ones that we've
yeah.
auctioned since then?
Well, no, we'll update it this week,
Okay.
early next week.
I'm just-
Yeah, no, but I mean, the ones that are still in play,
Yeah, the ones that are still in play.
if, for example, if there was a parcel that all of the expenses were $100,000, then under this policy, then the city would give a check to Federal Highway for $100,000 for that, and now own that property outright. And provided there's $100,000 worth of construction left for reimbursement, when that work is done, the city would submit evidence they paid the contractor that much, the city would be reimbursed that $100,000, and then the city owns that property. And if the city were then to sell it, the proceeds of that sale don't go to Federal Highway. So there is a way the city could gain from this, in being reimbursed the costs, and then still owning the property. So that would be, as I say, we're not sure whether this is good news or it's bad news yet, and it all has to do with the extent to which these costs can be reimbursed.
It's really a timing issue, so every time we have a meeting with them, I say, okay, we're not short sheeting.
Right, yeah.
No money left on the table.
Right.
But it's really,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard, I think, on the roll.
Yeah.
I worry about it, but we're paying attention to it. I worry that the rules change.
Well, that's what
This
I'm
is-
saying, the
this is
rules
how
are
we-
changing,
This
right.
is how we always did it, and now this is how we're gonna do it.
Right.
And the tighter the federal money gets, the worse it is. I was at a meeting this morning on the exit 36 South, and Congresswoman Custer was there, and she was explaining that 2015 is the year they expect to reauthorize the transportation bill, because it really just got a short window of reauthorization, and that the state has talked to us a lot about that. Boy, they haven't reauthorized it, they've only done 6 months or 8 months, whatever they did, and usually it's a typical multi-year highway transportation reauthorization bill. So, you know, I'm hopeful that that will happen, and then, but I think when you've done something a certain way for a long time and then money gets tight, you go, yeah, but the rules say this. I know we've always done it this way, but the rule,
Right.
and that's what we're very concerned about.
Right.
And so we have that conversation. We are relatively confident that we'll be successful, but
Mhm.
we just keep working.
So it's a crapshoot.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but, you know, I think that there's a lot of different things. One is, this project has been a long time coming. Federal money was designated for this project, there's no reason for it not to be there. What concerns me is not understanding exactly what could happen with NIMCO, or not understanding excess property versus surplus property. And remember, everything that the city has done on this project, from 1999 or whenever they started buying it, was all signed off by the federal government. They agreed and approved each of those things the way they do now. So we just wanna make sure that we stay on the same page.
Mhm.
Okay, Mr. Vanko, you wanna continue?
I think that was, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to.
I have a question.
Alderman Dean?
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for divulging this information this evening. This was presented at infrastructure other than the updates, but I have concerns with the reimbursement.
Well, I think we'll,
Well, I tried to ask those questions at the last infrastructure meeting, and just,
well, it's because we don't have final answers
I
already.
didn't ask for final
No,
answers.
no, I know.
got more this evening from Mr. Vanko than we did at infrastructure, by far.
Well,
And I was happy to hear it, that's all.
so it's,
So I'd like to thank you.
well, as we get that more information and the picture becomes clearer to us, it's easier to talk about it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything further from Mr. Vanko?
Just a
Commissioner Warren?
question on the right-of-way issue where the property owners are disputing value. That is with an issue with the Department of Transportation, as they're handling that DOT.
They and the Attorney General's office, yes.
Right, so is it a lawsuit at this point, or they're just in negotiation?
There's a process where they can be heard at the
BTLA.
BTLA
Right,
board,
Which
and it's,
Commissioner Moore is very familiar.
right, that's
So
what I
it's-
was wondering, so is that the way they're going, BTLA?
that is correct, yes.
And then if they don't like the decision, or we don't like the decision at BTLA, we can decide to pursue it in the courts, and that's what, another challenge,
Right,
because you don't know, it's up in the air, and
right.
if the feds wanna hold on to money, well, or the DOT does, in order to pay off whatever that potential liability is, it's gonna impact the timing of the project. And so we keep trying to push those forward and manage what that amount is, and we carry an amount in here that they're anticipating.
But we're out of the picture, the city of Nashua is out of the picture as far as those negotiations, correct?
Well, we are, when we signed the municipal management agreement with them, we agreed that they would do the right-of-way work, because DOT has the staff and something that they do. And so they've taken responsibility for that. And on some of the things, we've not been very happy with. I mean, Broad Street, I can't even talk about Broad Street and remain still, because how 44 Broad Street went is very unacceptable to me, and I don't think a good job was done there. Other projects, I think they've been right on the money and close to the, so, yeah, it makes it hard for us, but we have asked them to help, give us an opportunity to weigh in on some of it. So. Okay, anything further? Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.